going to start off with a thought experiment. Imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago. You're a tiny little Australopithecine afarensis, little brain. Your name is Lucy. Thank you. A lot of people in the Midwest don't get that. Evolution? What? Not that Lucy, the other one. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? If you think that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error in cognition. A false positive. You thought the wind was connected to something, and it wasn't. A was connected to B, and it wasn't. So that's a false positive, but that's relatively harmless. But if you think that the rustle in the grass is just the wind, and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early before reproducing. And we are the descendants of those who are most likely to make type 1 errors, false positives, versus type 2 errors, false negatives. That is to say, why can't you just stay in the grass and collect enough data to get the answer right? And the answer is that predators don't wait around for prey animals to collect more data. That's why they stalk and sneak up on their prey animals, so they can't get enough data. So we evolved the propensity to make snap decisions and make one kind of error more likely than another kind of error, and that kind of error, that false positive, that's superstition. That's magical thinking. That's assuming A is connected to B. It's a true pattern, and it isn't, and you're wrong. That's the basis of finding false patterns like God's. Now, what's the difference between the wind and a dangerous predator? The wind is an inanimate force. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent. And his intention is to eat me, and that can't be good. So what we also do, in addition to finding these meaningful patterns, is infuse in them agency. That is, it's alive, it's real, it has intention, and its intention is not good, so I better assume it's real. And this is the basis of animism and spiritism and polytheism and monotheism and the belief in angels and aliens and demons and spirits and poltergeists and gods. Gods are invisible agents who run the world, who control things, who create these patterns, who are these patterns that we use to explain things. All cultures everywhere in the world have created God beliefs. Gods with these intentional that are intentional agents. So my question tonight is not, like in my book, why do so many people believe in God? Here's a theory, which I just outlined for you. But for tonight, I want to ask, what's more likely? That our opponents here happen to pick the right God and the right religion among all the about 10,000 different religions and about 1,000 different gods that humans have constructed socially, anthropologically, psychologically, in the last 10,000 years. 10,000 different religions, 1,000 different gods. Our opponents agree with us that 999 of those gods are false gods. They are atheists like we are atheists. What I'm asking you to do is just go one God further with us. In The Believing Brain, my thesis is that we find patterns. I call this patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in both meaningful and meaningless noise. So we find patterns, we connect A to B, that's called learning. Everybody does it, all animals from C. elegans to H. sapiens, and if we didn't do it, we wouldn't survive. Our genomes cannot hold enough information to deal with a always constantly changing complex environment, so we're able to learn. And learning allows us to adapt in real time to a changing environment. Unfortunately, we're not good at detecting true patterns from false patterns, so the default option is just to assume all patterns are real, just in case. All A's are connected to B's in some causal way. That's just what our brains assume. And then on top of that, so God, in a way, God is like the ultimate pattern that explains everything. Then on top of that, we also infuse those patterns with intentional agency, and I call this agenticity, the tendency to infuse these patterns with intentional agents. And so, in other words, we assume not just that it's a real pattern, but that the pattern has something behind it, some intentional agent. So my thought experiment is, imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago. Your name is Lucy. and you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator or is it just the wind? Well, if you assume that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error in cognition, a false positive. You thought A was connected to B and it's not. But no harm. If you, on the other hand, think that the rustle in the grass is just the wind and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool before reproducing. So we are the descendants of those who were best at finding these meaningful patterns with the default rule of thumb that all rustles in the grass are dangerous predators. All patterns are real. But note the difference between a dangerous predator and just the wind. Just the wind is an inanimate force. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent, and he intends to eat me, and that can't be good. So we assume that predators have agency, intention, they're alive, they're, even if you can't see them, we assume that they're there. So in a way, God is like that. He's like this invisible agent in the sky that runs the world. It's the ultimate explanatory pattern. And then we layer on top of that this sort of whole social construction of religion, which reinforces the rules of cooperation and pro-sociality and altruism and being nice and keeps human aggression in check and so forth. And so God is like the ultimate enforcer of the rules, that hidden, invisible, intentional agent behind the patterns that keeps social cohesiveness together in human society. So to that extent, religion's pretty important. At least it has been up till now. I don't think we necessarily need it now, but we did then, and that's why it evolved. I mean, what do we mean by the paranormal, the supernatural? How would you know if something was actually paranormal or supernatural? I'm fond of saying these are just linguistic placeholders, just words we plug in when we can't explain something until we have an explanation. And then when you have an explanation, well, it's just neuroscience, or it's just dopamine, or it's serotonin, or it's oxytocin, or whatever it is, and it's not this, woo-woo stuff. So the words are just replacing it, and the more of those gaps we fill in, there's fewer of those kinds of words you need to use. And of course, we know that there are religious objections to it. Now, we have to give credit to the Episcopalians, secular Jews, and other very liberal religious people who have always supported gay marriage. Okay, that's good. Whatever it takes to keep pushing things along. But, white evangelicals, Protestants, mainline Protestants, black Protestants, and Catholics are really lagging behind. But even this, I'm predicting, will go way up. Once all the states approve it, then everybody quits talking about it. And then it's like, I was always in favor of it. And then what I predict that'll happen is all these guys are going to go, we were always in favor of gay marriage. Find some preacher back in the 80s who said he liked it. That's our guy. It's a little like the abolition of slavery. All my Christian friends and the people I debate, like Dinesh D'Souza, they always talk about William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce, the good evangelical Christian, fighting for the rights of blacks and the abolition of slavery. But he was the only one. And everybody objecting to him were his fellow Christians and evangelicals and so forth in Anglicans, not evangelicals, in the Church of England. And of course, all the politicians were against abolition. And that was drug kicking and screaming into the modern world. To his credit, at least he supported it. But when you really look at his biography, William Wilberforce, he was quite the little moralizer about all sorts of things. And what really bugged him about it was that slavery corrupted the ship captains and the slave owners, and it made him more degenerate. And he was just kind of against it in general as a degeneracy of the human condition. It wasn't just all people should be treated equally under the law. So that was kind of interesting to discover that. By the way, I have good news for those of you who are in favor not only of gay marriage, but the legalization of pot. I found biblical support. I did. I found biblical support for both, because in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13, it says, if a man lies with another man, he must be stoned. The abolition of slavery took off really right after the Enlightenment. And if you look at the triggers of that, of course, there were the Quakers and the Mennonites and these religious groups that were supportive of it. But if you look at their arguments, the arguments they were making, you don't find in the Bible. The idea that people should be treated equally under the law, that like Kant's argument that all people should be treated, never treated as a means to an end, but as an end in themselves. and Locke and Jefferson and all those types of arguments about the law being applied equally to all people and so on and so forth. That's the kind of arguments they ended up making. And so what happens is religious people, they inculcate those secular Enlightenment type arguments into their thinking. We all do. We're all children of the Enlightenment. And then they just sort of back into it and just think, well, I must have got that from Scripture or something. But when you really look at, I have a whole chapter on this, when you really look at what it says, it's not in there. There's nothing in there that I could find. Where Jesus says, like, thou shalt not treat people badly. He says, give away your belongings and follow me, and things like that. So, oh, by the way, what happens after we die? Well, where were you before you were born? Okay, so the fact that I don't know for sure, it does not mean that the theory that there is an afterlife is equal to the theory that there is no afterlife. All the preponderance of evidence is that nothing happens, anything more than like where you were before you were born. So the default, the null hypothesis in science, which we always begin with, your hypothesis is not true until proven otherwise, we have to assume there is no afterlife until there's some evidence to the contrary. Accepted, testable, replicable, and so forth. So in that sense, I think we can make a distinction, say, between, even though we can make a distinction between being an atheist, I just don't believe in God, and an agnostic, that it's not provable, or as Stephen Colbert told me when I was trying to explain the difference, agnostics are just atheists without balls, right? It's true, nobody's an agnostic behaviorally. It's just sort of a technical question on the ontological question of God's existence. But in fact, we do make choices about how we act in the world, and having a scientific worldview, I think, is a better perspective on the world than having a religious worldview. Thank you. First of all, in the word itself, near death. They're not dead, they're near dead. There's a very big difference there. And you can replicate these in the lab. You can put on Michael Persiger's God helmet that bombards the temporal lobes with electromagnetic fields, and people have out-of-body near-death experiences right there in his room. You can do it through oxygen deprivation by accelerating people in a centrifuge. These are pilots. Over half of them, when they accelerate up to where they pass out, they have out-of-body near-death experiences. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. They go through the tunnel and so on. You can see the videotape. They're just sitting there drooling. They're out. And of course, you can do this through sleep deprivation, through extreme environments. Arctic climbers, Arctic explorers, mountain climbers, solo sailors have these kinds of out-of-body near-death sense presence experiences under extreme environmental conditions. So those three lines of evidence tell us it's in the brain, not outside it. The problem of evil is a huge one. I'm not just talking about why did God allow the Holocaust or genocides, because you would say that's human free will. What about childhood cancer? Why should thousands, tens of thousands of infants, little children die of leukemia and other horrible diseases, not to mention what it does to the families who love them? Why would a good God allow that? What is the answer to that? Other than we're told, well, God works in mysterious ways. Well, it'd be nice if he worked in less mysterious ways and did something about it. But he doesn't, so it's up to us. It's always up to us. It's up to you. It's up to me to make the world a better place. Not to turn to some other supernatural force that may or may not come. Not to give up what we have now in hope of some blissful state in some other place. Here and now is what counts. Now is when you should be trying to do something to make the world a better place. Now is the time to make your relationships count with other people. Not in some other world where this is a mere prepping stage for the next life. It's this life that counts, regardless of whether there's another life or not. And historically, this is what has driven the moral arc forward, expanding the moral sphere to include more people into our moral considerations. That is what has driven change. You and I, individuals standing up and saying, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We demand the same rights as everybody else. I don't care what your religion is. This is what's right and fair. That's how it matters. That's what makes a difference. Not in some other life, but here and now. Who makes the rules? We make the rules. What did you say? The eternal referent is what we make of it. It's our rules. It's always been up to us. 100 years ago, you would think very differently about blacks and Jews and women than you do now. What happened? There's no new biblical scriptures that have come down on high through some prophet. No theologian has discovered a new way to interpret the Old or New Testament that said, "Thou shalt not enslave thy fellow man." It's not in there. "Thou shalt not oppress women or blacks." It's not in there. It didn't come from religion. It never comes from religion. It comes from you and I. It comes from oppressed people saying, "Enough! Stop it! I'm going to fight back." And then the people surrounding them start to take on the cause. And then it changes, and then it happens, and then religions get on board and go, "You know what? That's a good idea." That's how it happens. It's up to you and I. So let me end with the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who I started with, who is the inspiration for my book and my hero. He said, "The great burden of life is to always try to keep that higher self in command. And every time that old lower self acts up and tells us to do wrong, let us allow the higher self to tell us that we were made for the stars, created for the everlasting, born for eternity." Well, we are in fact made from the stars. Our atoms were forged in the interiors of ancient stars that ended their lives in spectacular paroxysms of supernova explosions that dispersed those atoms into space, where they coalesced into new solar systems with planets, life, and sentient beings capable of such sublime knowledge and moral wisdom. We are stardust. We are golden. We are billion-year-old carbon. Morality is something that carbon atoms can embody, given 1 billion years of evolution, the moral arc. Thank you.